grown up for me, but my home is the lowlands, and always will be. Someday you'll return to your valleys and your farms, and you'll no longer burn to be brothers in through these fields of destruction, baptisms of fire, I've witnessed your suffering as the battle raged high, and though it was so bad, in the fear and the alarm, you did not desert me, my brothers and there's so many different worlds, so many different souls, and we have just one world, but we live in different worlds. Now the sun's gone to heaven, the moon riding high. Let me bid you farewell. Every man has to die.
the Trentham and District's 2022 ANZAC Day Dawn Service. The Dawn Service in Trentham commenced 25 years ago by a group of friends who were wanting to honour and remember those who had gone to war, some of whom are never to return. 25 years later, and this, our community Dawn Service, has become somewhat of a Trentham tradition. This morning's service is run by members of our community for our community. Its aim is to commemorate those who have made sacrifices in order to make Australia what it is today. Our country is one of the safest in the world. Our country is one in which tolerance of another's beliefs have been safeguarded by those who have fought and won, so that we have the right to believe in whatever we wish. Through them, we maintain the right to pray to whom we wish. Through them, we maintain the right to vote and elect whom we wish. Through them, we maintain the right to be a community. Through them, we have earned the right to be who we are, and we are Australians, and we are proud of it. On the 4th of August 1914, Australia, which was part of what was then known as the British Empire, went to war. Alongside other member countries of the Empire, including Canada, New Zealand, South Africa and India, Australia joined with Great Britain to fight Germany and her allies. Turkey was one of Germany's allies. Australia was a young nation less than 14 years old. For the first time, Australians, some of them younger than the new nation itself, came together to form an Australian army. This force, the Australian Imperial Force, or AIF, initially 30,000 strong, left for overseas during November 1914. Whilst colonial troops from across all of the Australian states had fought in South Africa in the Boer War, the common question in 1914 was, how would these young Australians perform as soldiers in this awful conflict of nations? At approximately 3:30 a.m, Queenslanders from the 9th Battalion of the 3rd Brigade had finished transferring from ships into small boats. These were first towed and then finally rowed towards the beach at what was to become known as ANZAC Cove. 30 to 40 infantrymen, each laden with packs, ammunition, food rations, water and their weapons, were squashed tightly into each small boat. Due to tidal currents and navigational error, the landing ended up being further north than was planned. It was not onto an open plain, as had been intended, but instead across a narrow strip of beach at the foot of scrub-covered hills. Hills in which each movement was difficult. Hills in which the targets were extremely hard to locate. Hills in which the coordination and control of assaulting troops was almost impossible. At 4:29 a.m, the first Anzacs leapt ashore. Initially, only 200 or 300 Turks opposed them with small arms and machine gun fire. But by 4:45 a.m, Turkish shrapnel was exploding all over ANZAC Cove and Turkish reinforcements were being rallied. The remaining battalions of 3rd Brigade had landed into a constricted area of confusion, but these men had been told that they were the covering force for their division, so they dropped their packs and commenced to force their way upwards and inland, searching for Turks. Between 5:30 a.m. and 7:30 a.m, the 2nd and 1st Brigades had begun to move ashore. However, By 7 a.m, the 3rd Brigade could be seen from the ships at sea to be digging in on the 1st and 2nd ridges beyond the beach. As the day progressed, the New Zealand Infantry Brigade and the 4th Australian Brigade had landed. As early as 9 a.m, the first of the Turkish reinforcements had begun to press onto the Australians, who were the furthermost advanced. Savage fighting followed. For almost a week, there were sudden assaults, bombardments, fierce bayonet fights, and many sniping duels. Trench lines had been formed. Casualties were increasing. By the 30th of April 1915, of the 23,292 ANZACs who had actually landed, some 5,000 of them were now dead or wounded, and the Turks still held the high ground above Anzac Cove. But the landing had been made. The Anzacs had not broken. They had proved their courage under fire. The Australian and New Zealand Army Corps had not failed. They had faced the horrors of modern warfare with pain, discomfort and fear, but with courage and determination, and above all, without losing their sense of humour. Now, let me introduce Kate Smith, and Kate will remind us of the kind words Ataturk, one of the Ottoman Empire's commanders, had to say about our fallen soldiers.
Reputation built by the young men of Anzac. Today, Anzac Day in Turkey has no parallel anywhere in the world. It defies all the traditional ingrained hatreds between the invader and the defender, the victor and the defeated, Muslim and Christian. In Turkey, Anzac Day is a symbol of peace, forgiveness and understanding. The founder of modern Turkey, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, made an amazing observation about the Australians after the First World War. Ataturk was the commander of the Ottoman Empire's 7th Army during the First World War. He fought the Australians at Gallipoli, and he became modern Turkey's first president. Ataturk said, "Those heroes that shed their blood and lost their lives, you are now lying in the soil of a friendly country. Therefore, rest in peace." There is no difference between Johnnies and Mehmets. To us, where they lie side by side here in this country of ours. You, the mothers, who sent their sons from a faraway country, wipe away your tears. Your sons are now lying in our bosom and are in peace. After having lost their lives on this land, they have become our sons as well.
This year marks the anniversary of the beginning of the Boer War in 1902. It also marks the 80th year anniversary of the Battle of the Coral Sea, the 80-year anniversary of the Battle of Kokoda, and the 80-year anniversary of the bombing of Darwin, where 188 Japanese aircraft bombed Darwin, killing 235 people, wounding 400, with 30 aircraft destroyed and 11 ships sunk. Now I'd like to introduce you to Tony Whitlock, who will read a story about his father.
When my father died on June 30th, 2002, he left behind far more questions than answers. At 84 years old, he had a very full life, but had told me only a very few of the many stories that came from World War II. I'll recount some of them to you today. Born in Hastings, New Zealand on April 14th, 1918, he was the eldest of three, children of a third-generation newspaper man, William Whitlock. Papa Billy is known by his grandchildren. Also a veteran of war, World War I in his case. My father joined the New Zealand 2nd Expeditionary Forces in November 1939, only weeks after the declaration of war on September 3rd. He had left the Taranaki Daily News and because of his knowledge and experience of Morse code, he became a signal sergeant in the New Zealand 22nd Infantry Battalion, coincidentally based in Trentham, New Zealand, just 30 kilometres north of Wellington. After preliminary training, the 22nd Battalion first parade in January 1940, they sailed for England in May via Perth and Cape Town. They landed in Scotland in June, and the battalion was then transferred to southern England. The balance of that year was waiting for what was thought to be a full-scale attack by the Germans after the invasion of France. It didn't happen. And the next action was they were transferred to Egypt in March of 41. Then on to Cairo, Greece and Crete, where the battalion faced some of the most brutal battles, with many of them in hand-to-hand combat, defending the Malin airstrip on Crete from German paratroopers. By June it was back to Alexandria, Libya and then Lebanon, and then on to the Western Front, the Western Desert in North Africa. In April of 1942, the battalion, with my father now a major earned at Sandhurst, was sent to Syria and again back to Lebanon, before a posting to Alexandria and the battles around El Alamein in Egypt. By January of 44, the 22nd Battalion was engaged in one of the most infamous battles of World War II at Monte Cassino in southern Italy. The Germans had dug in and were trying to stop the advancing Allied forces pushing the Third Reich out of Italy. You never know what it's going to do to you, do you? My father told me some of the tales of the bayonet charges at Cassino and the bloody times that followed. I'm sure many of you have heard of Peter Fitzsimons, a journalist, author, and of course a man who first came to national prominence as a member of the Australian rugby union team, a Wallaby. He played 7 tests for Australia. It was during an ABC radio interview he used the phrase reluctant heroes. He had realised that researching his books on Tobruk, Kokoda and Villeneuve-Bretonneux, that most of these soldiers did not want to discuss their war exploits, but rather talk about Fitzy's rugby matches. That was my father, a man who had lived a remarkable life, both in uniform and out. In fact, in researching this tribute, I became far more aware of how much the Second World War and his military time shaped his life thereafter. After attending school at Hastings and Wellington in New Zealand, he had followed both his father and grandfather in a career in newspapers. Aged 16 years, he had joined the Auckland Herald as a copy boy and then cadet. Then followed the Taranaki Daily News before joining up in 1939. He returned to journalism after finishing his time in the war in Europe and went to work as a war correspondent, reporting for the Sydney Morning Herald, joining the British Pacific Fleet. There he started his role on the 26th of June in 1945. He stayed with the 1st Air Arm here until the signing of the peace treaty, along with representatives of the 9 Allied nations and the Japanese military in the USS Missouri in Tokyo Harbour in September 2nd, 1945. This, of course, was just weeks after the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was during this time, with the British Pacific Fleet as it headed towards Japan, the Admiral of the fleet had approached the press corps, inviting any journalists who were like to fly aboard a swordfish biplane on a torpedo bombing raid. Many of his press peers were greatly surprised when my father volunteered for this exercise. He told me of his exploits when I was in my teens in the 1960s. It wasn't until about 10 years ago that I found, amongst some of my father's clippings, an article from that front page story in the Sydney Morning Herald. And there it talked of these dangerous flying missions. I discovered in the story that he didn't just fly once on a swordfish torpedo run, but 12 times. An extraordinary life, always in search of a better story. My father's war led him to then join the Sydney Morning Herald, rising through the ranks to become, in 1947, the youngest ever Chief of Staff to this day. He was 28 when he went to the Fairfax management with the idea of installing radios in the journalists' and photographers' cars. They liked the plan, gave the go-ahead, and my father built the first two in the basement of their Broadway offices. Years later, he built me a radio from a Lancaster bomber receiver, which ignited my love of motor racing, listening to Sunday night broadcasts of Formula One European races in the early 60s. In 1946, my father married a 23-year-old journalist on the Herald named Neil Bedford. Shortly after, she had to resign, as a marriage between employees was not allowed. On January 27th of 1947, my big sister Fiona was born. My mother too was a hero of mine. Her contribution to the war began in earnest when, as a 17-year-old, she joined the SMH as the first female to cover general news. No uniform, but she was the first woman to cover the Sydney Stock Exchange and the Sydney docks. She reported on the sinking of the ferries at Circular Quay by Japanese midget submarines, just hundreds of metres from the Herald office in Pitt Street. My father was an amazing, humble man, so much so that he did little to document his incredible, productive life. He did not boast of his war achievements, nor did he recount them with me or my sisters. He did not involve himself in Anzac Days, only twice attended the march, once in Sydney and once at the Melbourne Shrine. I treasure that I had the father I did. He was an innovator and a natural leader. He was an original. And that he signed up to fight in 1939 and saw the war effort until the end in Tokyo Harbour in 1945. Thank you to Trentham and the organisers of this, including Anthony White, for allowing me to tell the story.
On this day, above all, we recall those who served in war and did not return to receive the grateful thanks of the nation. We remember those who still sleep where they were left, amid the holly scrub in the valleys and on the ridges of Gallipoli, on the rocky and terraced hills of Palestine, and in the lovely cemeteries of France. We remember those who lie asleep in ground beneath the shimmering haze of the Libyan desert, at Bardia, Derna, Tobruk, and amid the mountain passes and olive groves of Greece and Crete, and on the rugged snow-capped hills of Lebanon and Syria. We remember those who lie buried in the rank jungles of Malaya and Burma, in New Guinea and in the distant isles of the Pacific. We remember those who lie buried amid loving friends in our motherland and in our north. We remember those who lie in unknown resting places in almost every land, and those gallant men whose grave is the unending sea. Especially do we remember those who died as prisoners of war, remote from their homeland and from the comforting presence of their kith and kin. We think of those of our women's services who gave their lives in our own and foreign lands and at sea, and of those who proved to be, and much more than name, sisters of our fighting men. We recall too staunch friends who fought beside our men on the first Anzac Day, the men of New Zealand who helped create the name Anzac. We recall all of those who gave their lives in the British Army, the Royal Navy, the Royal Air Force, and in the other British and Dominion forces. And we think of those British men and women who fell when, for the second time in history, their nation and its kindred stood alone against the overwhelming might of the oppressor. We think of every man and woman who in those crucial hours died so that the lights of freedom and humanity might continue to shine. We shall be ever mindful too of those brave men who left our shores and died in Korea, in Malaya, in Borneo, in Vietnam, and more recently in Iraq, Timor and Afghanistan, assisting to safeguard Australia and other countries of the free world against the common enemy. May all those rest proudly in the knowledge of their achievement, and may we and our successors and the heritage they left us prove worthy of their sacrifice. This morning we would like to welcome Richard Hobson to sing for us during the laying of the wreaths. During the song I would ask anyone who has a wreath to come forward and place it on the cenotaph.
I vow to thee, my country, all earthly things above, entire and whole and perfect, the service of my love, the love that asks no questions, the love that stands the test, that lays upon the altar the dearest and the best. The love that never falters, the love that pays the price, the love that makes undaunted the final sacrifice. And there's another country I've heard of long ago, most dear to them that love her, most great to them that know. We may not count her armies, we may not see her king, her fortress is a faithful heart, her pride is suffering, and soul by soul and silently her shining bounds increase, and her ways are ways of gentleness, and all her ways are peace.
I would now like to ask Monique Sutton to recite the ode. Monique.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left in the cold. Age shall not weary them, nor the youth commend. At the going down of the sun, and in the morn, we will remember.
Thank you, Monique. I'll now ask Shani Clark to come forward and play the last post, which will be followed by a minute's silence, and in turn be followed up with Reveille.
Shani.
It has become tradition at the Trentham Community Dawn service to remember friends and members of our community who have passed away throughout the year. It's a list of locals who have passed away this year, and they include Peter Griffiths, John Simmons, Ron Ford, Meg Chignall, Denise Close, Rosemary Ward, Kevin Walsh, Calvin Murphy, Nancy Dunn, Graham Jennings, Pat Toomey, Bill Hadlow, Val McKeon, Stuart Reid, Judy Rothy, David Manning, Adolph Bleicher, Paul Kelly and Gloria Matheson. May they rest in peace. They are all sadly missed. I now invite Richard Hobson to lead us in the national anthem. Richard.
Australians, all let us rejoice, for we are one and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is girt by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty rich and rare. In his pain let every state advance Australia fair. In joyful strains then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
This completes the dawn service for 2022. I'd like to thank the locals who have spoken and sung for us this morning. I'd like to thank the members of the community for attending our dawn service, to acknowledge and remember those who fought and those that died, allowing us to preserve the freedoms that all Australians continue to enjoy. Thank you.